This is Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, a summary of Volume 3 in this Penguin Classics. Don't ask me what kind of edition, what kind of chapters they are, because, well, apparently each edition has different chapters. So I'm not gonna bother to count them. Let's get this started with. Okay, week 3, the battle comes. How does this work? As mentioned in the last video, which has been a very long time, we have our Napoleon and we have our Tsar Alexander. So back then I didn't even bother to mention this, but right now I am mentioning it. Regardless, here is our Tsar Alexander. Now I'm drawing him mainly in a green with yellow aura, or maybe it's yellow with green aura. Regardless, I'd like to think of it as green with yellow aura, mainly because this is going to be important later. Anyways, here is our Napoleon. I should probably draw him in blue. Here is our Napoleon, the leader of the French, and he's going to be all like, hey, I'm now going to go ahead and conquer your puny city. So, what do you say? And then he's all like, I want you to stay out of my border, out of Mother Russia. And he's like, you really expect me to believe to do that? And then he goes ahead and goes all rolling inside. And as a little recap, the Tsar is like, let's push them out. Now, historians like to think that... actually, I'll get to that later. Here we have the city named Borodino. Now, this is where our narrator starts going ahead and giving us a little bit of an analysis. For Borodino, it's the decisive battle that will decide the fate of Mother Russia and the fate of the Napoleonic Empire. Or at least the future of the eastern part of it, at least. Before that happens, though, we have Smolensk. There's a city named Smolensk, and it falls. Like, it really falls. Like, it goes into enemy hands really, really quickly. And what happens as a result is this. Now, the Russians, they don't want the French to be able to, like, go ahead and pillage their city. So they just set it all on fire. And then they ask their soldiers to go ahead and raid their shops. In fact, some of the soldiers went ahead and came to go ahead and start, raiding an old man's shop. The old man comes out and he's like, "What the heck are you doing?" And then he starts laughing. And then he's like trying to stop. And then he does this pose. And he's like, and he does this hysterical pose like, "Ha ha ha ha! Go ahead, boys. Go ahead. Take it." It doesn't really matter if it goes to the French anyway. And so some of the soldiers actually went away because they feared the crazy old man. But some of them just decided to pillage it even more and set it more on fire. And as a result, we have more fires, and more fires, and more fires. What else do we get other than that? Nothing else. I'll be completely honest with you. There's nothing left of the city. So by the time when the French actually come along, first of all, the city is abandoned, and second of all, it's in heck of a ruins. So the French now are supply-less. They still have their supply lines, but it's kind of fragile, mainly because they're so far into enemy lines that supply lines have to go in so far. But that was Smolensk. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about Borodino. Now Borodino, as I mentioned earlier, the decisive battle, the Russians, I should probably draw them in yellow-green, the Russians, or for now green, have all but went ahead and lost literally half or 50% of their army in that battle. And the French, well, they're still pretty numerous in size, so with this in mind, who do you think is going to win? Now, numbers-wise, it seems that the French are the ones that are going to win. But also remember, this is Mother Russia we're talking about. They're in home territory, at least for the Russians, they're in home territory. And as a result, the French, this gives them a little bit of a disadvantage, but they've worked with this disadvantage before. Now here's why this time it's a little bit different. Meaning because there's one rule in history that anyone should have learned by now, whenever they go ahead and learn history, that is that you never ever invade Mother Russia and expect to come out alive. Now, first of all, this was mainly because of the fact that the Russians had very, very severe winters, and Napoleon, for some stupid reason, decided that it was a great time to attack in the middle of the winter. Now, of course, his generals thought that was a terrible idea, and historians do not like to slander Napoleon, so as a result, they tried to go ahead and glorify it, saying that he was rationalizing that he could probably win the war if he did fight the Battle of Borodino. But no, that didn't happen. Instead, it was this stupid, frigid spirit of the Russians. Now, this is why I chose the yellow aura. They're all like, I summon the Russian spirit, and I summon Z to go ahead and attack the French. And so the Russian spirit that they summoned go ahead and decimated the entire French forces. Until like the French decide that this is probably not a good idea and that they need to retreat. And as a result, we have several Russian victories. Now, this is where the narrator goes ahead and starts analyzing what happened at Borodino. In the sense of like at Borodino, it was like, hey, how did the French historians like I'm going to go ahead and give this little accent. Historians like to think that Napoleon himself was rationalizing and how all this data and stuff and just did not have this one little figure of data that he did not have, the Russian winter. Technically, and because of that, because he didn't know that, he went in expecting to win, and he would have won if it wasn't for that little mishap. Now, first of all, he did know that that winter was dreadful there, but he thought that this was not going to work out the best way ever. And then, second of all, Russian historians like to think that Tsar Alexander was actually intentionally luring the French right into their heartland so that they could go ahead and be squashed into this winter trap. Now, in fact, it was actually the contrary. Tsar Alexander really wanted the French out. But that's not what he got, but he did eventually go ahead and get into this happened some little situation where he was able to somehow trap the French and then freeze them to death. Yeah, eventually they did. They were able to go ahead and escape this hellbound of a prison, but they were pretty frostbited. They were pretty frostbitten, and now they're starting to become a little bit of a ghost. Now, nothing fuels patriotism more than a victory, and as a result, the Russians kind of were having a heck of a time trying to go ahead and chase the French out of their country. And what happening in the meantime is all those demolished cities, well, they're trying to go ahead and rebuild. Now, they were able to defend Moscow, mainly because they were able to get the French out before they could even reach Moscow, so Moscow was safe. But now, all the Russians that are left behind in these cities need somewhere to go. And as a result, they decide that, hey, you know what? I think it's about time that I move my family. And so we have this little story of a very rich man and his family, the Count and then Natasha and the other characters that we met from before. And now that we're out of the history books, we finally go ahead and look how they're doing. Now, apparently, valuables are worth nothing anymore. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Like, what does jewelry and watches and expensive bronze mirrors have any value in this state of a world where they're all, broken and stuff? Maybe if you move to Moscow, they're worth something again, but unfortunately in this demolished city, the most expensive thing that you can have is a cart. Now, a cart back then might have just cost like 5 rubles? Is that what the Russians used back then? 5 rubles. But now they're being offered money for it for like 50,000 rubles. Yeah, that's not really how it works. How you draw a ruble symbol. That doesn't really matter. So they're all thinking, yeah, well, should we let the wounded actually use it? Because they actually kind of need it more, but then they realize something. Yeah, let's just start packing our boxes and then go. And then suddenly their cousin who's come in and he's got a bunch of wounded soldiers with him and he's all like, he's got a bunch of wounded soldiers with him. And so he himself is also kind of wounded. So they're all like, okay, I give up. Okay, let's pity them. And so they take out most of the boxes, and then they load all the injured soldiers inside the carts. And then they have 30 carts in total, so eventually all the carts are full of wounded soldiers, and they're all heading for Moscow. And then in one cart and in the carriage, it's the entire family with a bunch of boxes that are the stuff that they really, really need. The other stuff that they spent hours packing away is gone. Or at least not abandoned, but put into warehouses until the day they can come back to get them. And is there pretty much anything else that I can really say about this? That's it. That's the entire story. Oh, and we also have a very angry Tsar Alexander, and then an angry soldier being captured by the French, and then the French trying to interrogate him, and other things. But other than that, there's nothing really much else to talk about. At least that's where my volume 3 ends. Not sure where yours ends. But next time, we're going to be talking about a lot of good stuff. So until next time, 新好呢 peace. Bye-bye. Please subscribe.